And so I think the challenge here, and this speaks to the point of that has been raised, you know, with the previous questions, particularly the question from the representative from Sisters in Islam. One of the challenges here in terms of advancing democracy in Muslim societies is you have to be able to cultivate alternative sources of religious authority. You have to come up with interpretations of Islam and those Muslim political leaders who can speak authentically and authoritatively about Islam's values, its precepts, its principles, but they can do so from an authentic perspective, but also they can advance what I would call, for lack of a better term, a modernist reading of Islam. We have a short supply of those types of clerics. The people on the other side of the debate have an abundance of those clerics. And so when, you know, the average sort of person, a simple Muslim somewhere wants to, they hear two different voices, you know. They hear the voices of the traditional ulama who speak with a lot of authority, and you know, people don't hear really anything from the other side. And so it's natural that most people who don't have the time, the luxury to, read, for example, what Fazlur Rahman wrote in his wonderful book, Islam and Modernity, or read the works of Khalid Abu al-Fadl, or read the words of sort of, very important sort of Islamic thinkers, they'll gravitate to what they hear most. So one of the challenges here is, cultivating those alternative religious sources of authority. We need more Muslims, I think, to go into the training of becoming alims and clerics who are both strongly versed in the traditional Islamic study of Sharia and basic principles, but also have an engagement with the modern world. And there's actually a connection here with democracy, because if you know anything about the history of democracy in the Catholic world, Catholicism, until relatively recently, opposed equal rights for men and women, opposed democracy, opposed modernity, opposed all of these modern things that sort of exist today. And then what happened was in the early 1960s, there was a major meeting of the Catholic Church at the Vatican II forums in the early 1960s, and they reinterpreted a lot of their traditional positions on democracy, human rights, gender equality, reinterpreted them in ways that were democracy enhancing and human rights enhancing. And what you saw is that within a short period of time, there was a major transition in Catholic majority countries toward democracy. There was this famous thesis by Samuel Huntington called the third wave of democratization. This was an argument that said that after the early 1970s, a whole series of countries that were previously authoritarian were transiting to democracy. And what was interesting about the third wave of democratization is that 2/3 of those countries were Catholic majority countries. And they made that transition in part because the sources of religious authority had reinterpreted key sort of belief systems that allowed democratic forces to support processes of democratic transition, as opposed to the position that they took before, which they sided with the old authoritarian military elites, particularly in Latin America, in Portugal, and in Spain. So I think there is hope that if you can develop those alternative sources of authority, then many of these issues that we are struggling with here and that have been raised can start to correct themselves. But of course, Islam is not like the Catholic Church. There is no one source of authority. So you're going to always have conflicting voices. You're going to have more radical, what I would call anti-democratic interpretations of Islam that are going to be very powerful, largely because they get a lot of money from certain countries in the Gulf. And we don't have those alternative sources of revenue that can train young Muslim clerics in a more democratic interpretation of Islam. This is a huge problem. This is something that needs to be focused on and paid attention to. I think we need to start thinking about investing in that particular project of alternative progressive sources of religious authority, because unless we do, then the more anti-democratic interpretations of Islam are always going to be able to win the public debate and sway people in their direction, because they're going to claim to speak for Islam when I think they need to be challenged, and these things can be reinterpreted provided that there's sufficient political will to do so.